This is amazing. Thank you all for joining. See some familiar faces already. Hi, Katie. Hi, Nancy. This is great. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome to a conversation with Indigenous youth in Maine. I will introduce our panelists in a moment. Ignash Winishnash Tusha. Good evening. My name is Sage Purser. I'm Yakima, and I am here with you all today as a board member of the Holocaust and Human Rights Center. I'm also the Indigenous Youth Engagement Division Manager at Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness, and I have the absolute honor of working with these amazing panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. Kiana Pardilla is Passamaquoddy and Penobscot, is a recent graduate of the University of Maine with a bachelor's degree in marine science. She currently works in the youth division at Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness, where she strives to incorporate Indigenous ecological knowledge into fisheries and the mainstream education system through experiential learning. We have Jaden Love, Danae, and Penobscot. She is a third-year student at the University of Maine, majoring in elementary education. She is a founding member of the Penobscot Nation Youth Council. And we have Carmela Bear, Penobscot and Passamaquoddy. They are a first-year student at John Baptist High School and a member of the Penobscot Nation Youth Council. Carmela advocates for social justice and Indigenous rights alongside her mother, Molly and Dana, the tribal ambassador of Penobscot Nation. So we welcome you all. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. We're gonna jump right in. So this first piece, I'm going to ask these panelists their experience of growing up Indigenous in Maine. And our first question is, can you describe a moment in your life where you realized you were different because of your race? And for this, I believe we had Kiana starting us off.
Yes. So the first thing that I can think of was middle school Y dances. A lot of the youth going to these already knew each other from surrounding schools, so my friend group from our reservation stuck out like a sore thumb. And that prompted questions like, oh, where are you from? Oh, so you're Indian. Oh, what percent are you? Do you live in teepees? A lot of them have heard that we didn't have paved roads on our reservation, so they asked if we rode horses or drove four-wheelers, and they asked us if we shot bow and arrows and hunted for our own food. And then I can think of middle school sporting events as well. I remember having fans shouting inappropriate racist comments at our home gym and having them kicked out. And I can also recall being at an away game and fans were also shouting and no action was being taken. So my coach, who was actually my mom at the time, chose to not put us in that situation. We ended up forfeiting the game and having to leave. And I think the next experience was high school after that, and I went to John Baptist Memorial High School in Bangor, and I think a lot of the students just thought that I looked different than everyone else, and they always ask me, what are you, or what ethnicity are you, what nationality, whatever, because I look different, I guess. And that's really when I started actively educating myself on how I could best respond to these actions and common questions.
Thank you, Kiana. Jaden or Karim, do you have anything you wanted to add to this question by answering this question?
I'll go. So I was always told that I was Native American, but I never knew what it was like. I never really experienced it. But the one story that I remember is back in middle school at a basketball game. One of my teammates who is Native, but she's also African American, my mother overheard her say that we were cheating and that she was way too dark to be Native and she's Black, and like saying all this stuff like we're cheating. And that was when my parents like realized that like they need to tell me that I may be judged off the color of my skin just like she was. And so they really like they sat me down after that and they told me and basically educated me on what it's like to be like judged off of my skin. Like Kiana said, the Y dances, I used to get told that we had a grocery store over here, so we never needed to go off the island, or if they came over, they'd get shot. And just many just like racist things that were being told.
Karim, did you have anything you wanted to add to this question?
Yeah, being born during my mom's like really prime, well not prime, right now is her prime I would say, but like when she was really getting started and really involved in the whole activism field, I had been brought up knowing that I was different, and that but everyone's equal. Like I'm different and I might be treated differently, but that doesn't make me better or less than anyone else. And so I had always had that knowledge growing up, but I never really knew the significance behind it until cross country in 4th grade. I had been running and a girl comes up behind me and she's like, "Hey, can we walk for a second?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, okay." So we're walking and she's like, "So what school are you from?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm from Indian Island." And she's like, "Oh yeah, I can tell by your braids." And so I was like, "Oh, okay." Like in that situation, when you're put on the spot like that, you have no clue what to say. I didn't feel targeted, but like I knew like, oh, this girl is getting her information from not a smart enough source. So, and then other things had been said during sports games. We had been told, go back to African Island, go back to where you came from, stuff like that. So obviously I had never had to forfeit any games, and I'm very lucky in that way. I'm young enough where people are somewhat more politically correct. Definitely not fully there, but we're making progress. So I never had like very violent experiences at other schools, but I had definitely been exposed to kind of, oh yeah, just you always know that you're different when you're growing up and you have to go to other places where people don't treat you the way your classmates at your own school do.
Yeah, thank you all. I think those are all amazing points that really speak to the question, right? I do want to say, and I probably should have said this in the beginning, that these questions that I'm asking or proposing are deep questions. This first one is a deep question, and I just want to show my appreciation for each of you being willing to to lean in and answer these questions. So thank you. Our next question is, how has your upbringing, environment, community, school, mentors, family, friends impacted your Indigenous cultural identity? And Carm, I think we had you going first for this one, kind of stemming from what you had just said.
Yeah, I think we did. So I'm very lucky in the sense that my whole family is very culturally in tune. I had been brought up in the scene of my family taking medicine, the traditional medicines, very seriously, and always handling my cultural and traditional like regalia and eagle feathers and other traditional customs such as beadwork and sweetgrass, that sort of thing, to always handle it with care. And so I had always grown up being exposed to, oh, well, this tradition of dancing around a drum in the grass, like that's very, it is a prayer. And I'm so thankful for the fact that I was able to experience that and have known the significance behind it at such a young age. Because I know that other Indigenous youth, they don't always get to have that knowledge and that sort of upbringing around the drum and around medicine and prayer and traditions. So I'm very thankful that I was able to be sort of raised around cultural traditions.
Thank you, Carm. Kiana or Jaden?
I'll go. So our traditional ways have always been a beautiful part of my family's way of life for as long as I can remember. It's definitely an honor and a privilege to grow up having access to our language, history, and traditions. I grew up on the Penobscot Reservation, and it definitely was a unique experience to say the least. I have remained friends with the same kids I went to preschool with, and it's a bonus we all share the same culture and upbringing. Everyone knows each other, their families, their history, and their personal business, and it most definitely has its disadvantages for lack of privacy and discretion, but to be secure in your environment is a benefit, I think, to become a well-rounded person. And because of this, I was able to experience an overwhelming amount of love from all directions. Everyone wants to see you succeed and is willing to help you do so. And I think there's a level of pride that was instilled in us from a very young age to be proud of who we are and where we come from. And I believe that's helped us find ways to help us shine through past struggles. And I still carry that pride and resilience with me today, and I will for the rest of my life.
Jaden.
So I grew up heavily involved in my culture. When I was a baby, my parents used to go to powwows where there'd be drumming and dancing always around. I grew up on the Penobscot Nation Reservation, and my Mimi, who was Navajo, who wasn't from there, always made sure that she would teach me also her language and culture. And to this day, I still remember it. Growing up on a reservation definitely impacted my cultural identity. I grew up with the Penobscot language and culture being taught in Indian Island School and being spoken in households. I have been with the same class since pre-K, and to this day, we're all still close. My community gave me a class that turned into friends, that turned into brothers and sisters, and they shaped my cultural identity as well. If I did not grow up with my class or language, drumming or dancing, I don't think my cultural identity would be as strong as it is.
Yeah, I think you all like really spoke to the fact of growing up um, on reserve with family who who you call family now, who started off as classmates, right? And watching that transition, although there might be some ebb and flow, and I think we'll get into that a little, well soon when we talk about the transitions between um, elementary school to middle school to high school to college. So that's what we're moving into next. What was your experience transitioning from middle school to high school to college to work life? And I believe we had Jaden leading this off.
Okay. Transitioning from an all native elementary and middle school to going to a high school that barely had any minorities was a change, a very shocking change. The one thing that really stuck with me was financial stability that my classmates at my high school that were non-native had, that my parents didn't. My parents were young, and many of my fellow classmates, their parents were older. And growing up on a reservation, I was always afraid to ask my non-native classmates for rides home or invite them to my house. So I clinged on to my fellow native classmates that attended my high school or ones that have already visited the reservation before, because they understood and they did not judge my house or the chaos of my house. Going from high school to college, the one thing that really impacted me was the different points of views and political opinions that people had. Because I went from a small high school to a pretty big college. So I entered this class, I entered political science class, and I was shook by some of the uneducation that people have on race is America. Some people said some very rude things during that class. And yeah, until this day, it's still, some of it still bugs me, but I just don't.
Thank you, Jaden. Carm, your experience, if you'd be willing to share.
I, unlike Kiana and Jaden, have not had the high school to college transition yet, which is crazy. But I am a freshman, so the feelings of going from an all Indigenous middle school on a reservation that was down the street from my house to like a 25-minute drive high school in Bangor, it's rough. It's scary because in my 8th grade graduation class, I had 9 people. So to go from that small of a class, and the middle school altogether had like 24 kids. So, and there's 24 kids like in my study hall. So to to be in such a small setting, like just thrown into this giant school, it's really scary. Because not all the teachers really remember you fully. There's so many kids that they have to teach that nothing is as personal as it is on the island. And that really kind of hit me because I was like, oh, these teachers don't know my parents. Like my 8th grade homeroom teacher was best friends with my grandmother. So to go from that to a school where my math teacher forgot my name like a month into class, it's insane. And another thing that is also very kind of unnerving is not in every class is there like safe people. And I don't mean that in like a violent way. I mean that in like there's not people that I agree with morally or politically, and therefore I feel like my like emotional stability could be at risk, because they say some things that really kind of are like, oh, so you really don't believe in like equality for everyone. So it's very different, and it's still something that is going to take a lot of getting used to, but obviously I have 4 years, I'll figure it out.
Yeah, so I went to John Baptist as well, and I feel a lot of the things that you're saying, Carm, a lot of the points that you hit are really important. But yeah, so I went from Indian Island School to John Baptist, and from, like Carm said, coming from a school that feels like family and ending at the top where everyone knows you, everyone looks up to you, going to a large school. I was one of 3 other Native kids that went to John Baptist that year. And no one knew me. No one really bothered to know me. Everyone was asking where I was coming from and what my ethnicity was. It was really hard to make friends, but I played sports. So I found myself clinging to my athletic identity instead, and it often felt like I was living amongst 2 worlds. Going from high school to college, I think that was the hardest transition for me. I went from John Baptist I started at the University of Southern Maine. And again, it was just hard for me to make friends. And I continued to play basketball there. And I ended up still trying to hold on my athletic identity so much that I tried to major in athletic training. That didn't work out for me, obviously, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. It was hard for me to make those decisions without the support of my family and my community being close by. And my transition from college to work life, I'd say, was pretty easy because this is what I do now for work. I work with Sage and Carmela and Jaden and other Indigenous youth, and they're pretty amazing and inspiring. And I do think that it was a struggle for me to let go of my marine biology background and kind of switch gears into this youth division, but I still find myself using that knowledge with the youth every time I'm with them. And I've had the opportunity with this position to really hone in on my interests and passions and how I'm going to give back to my community.
Thank you all so much. I know in our prep for this question, we talked a lot about the friend group to family and like making friends and what that's like transitioning through and like the ebb and flow. Like I know Jaden, you had touched on it before as well, with then people kind of branch off and do their own things, but they're like people always come back home. And that's one thing you can really stay connected with. So that's important. The next question talks about or asks, did you feel seen throughout those transitions? Or what would you have liked to see more of? So when I ask, did you feel seen, it could mean representation of the culture. It could mean how you were seen, right, as an Indigenous person or just a person going to school. Kiana, do you want to lead this one off? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So the answer to that question is no. I did not feel seen. I think I was experiencing the outcomes of Indigenous erasure. And I will admit that sometimes I prefer not to be seen, because with people knowing my Indigenous identity comes a whole set of questions with malicious intent or not. And I feel the pressure to educate and respond eloquently because I represent our people. And sometimes I struggle with this because it's not always easy to answer these questions nicely, especially when they prompt so many emotions. It becomes hard to educate at that point. I wish I could have had a resource to redirect people to do that. And I didn't feel the need to educate people on the spot. I wish there was an accurate Indigenous history class for students to take throughout the mainstream education. And I wish professors and teachers were aware of the inaccurate information that they are teaching currently. And I wish I had a platform to talk about these struggles with other Native students.
Thank you. I know collectively we talked about this one quite a bit, whether to feel seen or not seen. So I'm going to pass it to Jaden if you're willing to jump in.
Okay. So I didn't feel represented or seen. I don't think I wanted to be seen. I wish I was brave enough to be seen, because the transition was quite hard. Being at a school that didn't know Native history and there wasn't a lot of minorities. When a teacher would teach about Native history, the students along with the teacher would stare at me after because they knew I was Native. So that kind of made me not want to be seen. And I just wish that Native history was taught to kids in elementary school, middle school, because going into high school and getting asked questions that I don't even know from other tribes or racist questions, that was kind of it made me not want to be seen, I think.
Thank you, Jaden. Carm, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I sort of relate to Kiana in the sense that I don't feel fully represented or seen. But I also very much agree with the fact that I don't want to be seen all the time. It's a very hard balance to be like, hey, I want to weigh in on this, but I don't want them, because there's so much more of them, I don't want them to like attack me. So I mean, I grew out of that phase very quickly though, because now everyone in my study hall knows, because I've educated in a loud tone of voice on multiple subjects. And you know what? It's worked out so far. I don't think their opinions have changed any, but I'm happy I said something. But it only makes me more thankful for the teachers I do have who are very thoughtful about teaching what I was taught in middle school to their students in their history classes. Like one of my teachers, he didn't teach me, he doesn't have me as a student, but I'm in his homeroom. For Native American Heritage Month, he wrote out names that come from Indigenous languages in Maine. And I thought that was so cool. I felt so like, wow. And then I have another person who I'm not in any of their classes, but I'm highly interactive with them. They have their history students read books about accurate Indigenous history that I already knew, but obviously no one else does. And it's really kind of tricky because there are 5 out of over 400 students, 5 of them are from Indian Island, ABAPs, and 3 of them are freshmen that I know. And then the other 2 are senior and a junior. So it was very hard since obviously there's such an age gap. I don't talk to them much. I'm related to both of them, but we don't talk. So it was very hard in that adjustment to kind of have some sort of mentorship. So I really wish I could have seen more of like a, hey, it doesn't have to be if you're from the island, but if you're from a very small school, this is like quick starter tips, whatever, about how you can kind of get to feel more comfortable in your classrooms. And I wish more of my teachers would have done like somewhat excessive icebreakers to kind of make me feel more comfortable in my classrooms and with my classmates.
Whew, there was a lot talked about in this question, and I absolutely thank you for leaning into that. I am going to drop a book link in the chat. It's currently sold out, but when it does become available, I would kind of point you to this. Chris Newell spoke at our virtual youth gathering this past weekend, and there's some really good resources, especially around this holiday coming up. And I think, in this question, when we talked about feeling seen, is it seen like represented? Or is it seen as in like targeted or microaggressions? Like in what way? And I think you all spoke to that. So thank you. The next question is, how have you now, and this is just, talking about how we've gotten to this point, right? Middle school, high school, college, work life, embraced your Indigenous identity? Jaden, can I pass this to you?
Okay. I think I've embraced the leadership role of my Indigenous identity. Indian Island teachers would always tell my class that one day we would change the world. And I kind of took it to heart. And they said that we'll always make the community better and that we're the next generation to step up. So hearing that made me want to do something bigger and better. So I really leaned into leadership, and I take any opportunity that really comes my way. I helped create the youth council. I ran for our tribal council, and I volunteer at basically any event that needs help. Even if they don't even ask for the help, I'll go there during the day and we'll show up and be like, hey, I'm here to help. But I take any opportunity that really comes my way.
Carm, Kiana, feel free to jump in.
I can go. I feel like a huge part of expressing my Indigenous identity is doing stuff like this and being able to have a jump start on being involved with projects like this and being able to add my 15-year-old commentary that is just a bunch of rambling, if I'm honest, but so I'm very lucky and I'm really thankful for the fact that I am able to have opportunities like this and I am allowed to have the exposure to learning my accurate history, to being able to speak my language if I feel so inclined, and being able to practice traditions and do sacred prayers. And another, that adding on to that topic, I am so happy that I am not like, I don't feel any type of oppression when I give my opinion in class topics and I am able to talk freely about my culture. Obviously I get a couple stares, but I'm allowed to talk about that and I'm allowed to express myself through that. And looking back on some of our ancestors, 3 generations before us, they weren't allowed to talk about that. They were in boarding schools. They weren't allowed to speak their language. So I am so happy that at my age, where not that long ago, an Indigenous woman my age would have been in a boarding school, having to cover up her identity. But I'm able to talk about it freely. I'm able to express my opinions. I'm able to give my political views, and I'm able to talk about my culture in big groups of people like this. Yeah.
Thank you, Carm. And if you don't mind, I'm going to include the link to the film Bounty. You're okay with that? Okay.
That's completely fine.
All right. More resources in the chat. Kiana, did you want to speak to this?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Carm, for mentioning our ancestors in residential schools. I definitely embrace my cultural identity, even despite the struggles I had throughout school. And I speak now for those who couldn't. And I've always taken freedom with class prompts to try and educate people about our culture. And I've tried to explain my cultural experiences more so in college than in high school. I think I did it through writing a couple times in high school. But in college, I decided I wasn't going to be afraid to confront professors when they were teaching inaccurate information or contributing to Indigenous erasure and skipping over Indigenous people entirely. I've had some success with this. That has resulted in entire segments of Indigenous history or knowledge included in curriculums, but more often than not, they did not appreciate being told that they were wrong. Most professors at the University of Maine in Orono were unaware that the Penobscot Reservation was 10 minutes away from the university. And now I just try to take every opportunity to educate people as best as I can. So much that I've taken on a career to do just that and take on opportunities like this.
Thank you, Kiana. Thank you, all of you. Obviously, you all have really embraced this by speaking out, and your voice matters, and we're so happy to hear it. Switching gears a bit, the next question is about COVID-19. COVID-19 has devastated many lives. This pandemic has impacted Indigenous communities, their right to sovereign nations, and the way in which the nation and state have worked with tribal nations. How has COVID-19 impacted you and your community?
Can I go first with this one? Okay. So a huge part of the way I express myself culturally is through dance. I love shawl dancing. I love being around the drum. I love the songs. That's just where I really feel very connected to the creator, to my ancestors. So with COVID, we haven't had opportunities to have these types of gatherings where we share meals, we share beadwork, we share songs and dances. And that has really affected me. I have so much fun at socials and gatherings. So to not be able to have that like not monthly, but like yearly type of healing around my people and around the drum and around songs, I don't know if it's affected, I think it's affected my community. I can't speak for everybody, but it's strongly affected me. I haven't had an opportunity to put on my regalia, to dance with my shawl, and that sucks. and it's really upsetting because there's an ample way that everyone can kind of help with this, and some people just refuse to for whatever reason. So it's sad, and I know that's definitely affected me and my sister and my other family members. So yeah.
Thank you, Carm. Jaden?
Okay. Hold on. Let me see. Okay. I was a freshman in college and we were only supposed to be out of school for 3 weeks, and then it turned into over a year. I was taking college classes in person and just got used to going in person, and now we're going all online. I went from almost making dean's list to my grades slipping due to being online. And going from social interaction to none was a huge change. But COVID did help one thing for me. It made me slow down and focus on myself. I realized I didn't want to be a bio major, and I changed to elementary education. But the Indigenous community suffered greatly. The Navajo Nation was hit really hard, with many not being able to access water, food, or electricity. And when the Navajo Nation asked for medical supplies, the government greeted them with body bags. Thanks to the people in Ireland, $2 million was donated to the Navajo and Hopi Nation to provide protection from the pandemic, not from the United States government. During the height of the pandemic, the infection rate in the Navajo community was 2,304 cases per 100,000, which was the highest in the country. Nearly 40% higher than the epicenter of New York City. And many Navajo people that passed away were older, and they were the ones that kept the culture. So many traditions were lost with those who died from COVID.
Thank you. Kiana?
Yeah, so COVID has impacted our communities greatly. It's impacted our economy and the wellness of our people, and it's impacted the time we're able to spend with our elders, and it also puts the lives of our cultural knowledge keepers at risk. It has impacted the environments where we can learn our language and traditions. It's impacted our ceremonial practices and limited our medicine gathering, as well as our traditional harvesting, hunting, and fishing. And I think it's brought on a lot of mental health issues because of this. And because of the devastating trauma our people have experienced with other diseases introduced to our communities.
Thank you. We have 3 really important questions to ask, and I am well aware that we are running up on time. If we could do, and I know this one's extremely hard to do quickly, but I think it's really important and it needs to be heard. So, switching gears a bit, this month is Native American Heritage Month. And this time of year can be very heavy due to the holidays celebrated, such as Indigenous Peoples Day, Halloween, sports events, and Thanksgiving. Can you speak to this month? Specifically, I had listed here Indigenous Peoples Day, but I'm going to let you go where you want to go with this one, with mascots and Halloween costumes included in that. So whoever wants to start.
I I can start again if that's okay with everybody. Sorry, I know I'm going first on a lot of questions. I'm just really excited to be here. Uh, so to talk about mascots, I should stop slipping in the chair. To talk about mascots is very type of a sensitive topic because I have grown up knowing so much about why these are offensive and why they are not okay, and because of what my mom did in Skowhegan and what she's doing everywhere. So I think it's so extremely inappropriate to have mascots be Indians, because we're people. Like, you don't see people being like, okay, I'm gonna dress up as a Black person now and that's gonna be the mascot for the team, because it's not okay. Indigenous people are people, they are not mascots, and they are not costumes, which leads me to my next point. The over-sexualized Indian costumes, Native costumes, that's like so wildly wrong, and I don't know why people just refuse to understand that. Like, I know this isn't very well spread information, but Indigenous women, missing and murdered Indigenous women is an entire thing. Indigenous women, 1 in 3 are assaulted. They go missing, 1 in 3. And they are 10 times more likely to experience sexual assault, sexual harassment, and 5 times less likely to get justice. So with these being the statistics, people still decide to be like, hey, I'm gonna like wear a short skirt that's made out of fake leather and be like, hey, look guys, I'm an Indian. Like, it's just so not okay. Like, why would you think it's appropriate to further sexualize a group of women who are already very marginalized and targeted for sexual crimes? But for this to be Native American Heritage Month and Indigenous Peoples Day to even be a thing, I think that really shows how far we've come in such a short time. And I think it truly represents how far we can continue to go in my lifetime, well, our lifetime, future generations. And I think it really illustrates tribal sovereignty and cultural independence.
Thank you, Carm, and let's continue because I know everyone else has a lot to say on this one.
Yeah, so mascots and costumes are dehumanizing. They perpetuate a stereotype that is harmful to Indigenous identities in the way that depicts what natives should look like. And when in actuality, Native people do not have a certain look to them. And to preface the problem of sexualizing Native women through Halloween costumes, our tribes were traditionally matrilineal. Our clans were passed on through our mothers, and women are seen as sacred healers and protectors. A good example of this is best described through our language. In Penobscot, the word for woman means one who defends, rescues, and protects. So in the process of colonization, the two of the main goals of colonization were conquest and assimilation. Both oppressed Indigenous women most. Through assimilation efforts, these societies were soon replaced with patriarchal systems, allowing Indigenous people to internalize beliefs of male superiority. And this assimilation process was successful largely by the use of sexual violence. It was used as a tool of colonialism to demonize Native women whose gender roles challenged the Western patriarchy. And additionally, associations of Native women with nature and land contributed to the harmful discourse of claim and conquest. This narrative can be seen today in the sexualization of Native women through mediums such as the Halloween costumes depicting an exotic savage or a polka hottie, and its imagery like this that encourages and condones violence against Indigenous women and prevents progress in terms of correcting historical trauma. This is a problem not only for Indigenous women, but also for our communities and our tribal sovereignty.
Jada.
Okay. Native Halloween costumes are disrespectful, especially to Native women. Native Halloween costumes named Sexy Warrior or Hot Tribal Chief sexualizes Native women. 56.1% of all Indigenous women experience sexual abuse in their lifetime. And Indigenous women are murdered 10 times higher than any ethnicity. In a study conducted at 4 sites in the US and Canada, an average of 40% of women involved in sex trafficking identified as American Indian, Native American, or First Nations, yet women represented 10% or less of the general population in these studied communities. So having these costumes put a stereotype on Native American women results in missing and murdered Indigenous women stats to increase. Women are highly respected in our community and honored in our culture. And by having these costumes, it disrespects our people. And going back to celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, it is very important. It used to be illegal in the state of Maine to celebrate any part of our culture. So being able to celebrate it now with Indigenous Peoples Day and is a very proud moment. Our ancestors fought for us to be able to have this day, and we embrace where we can embrace our history and culture. So celebrating this day is honoring our ancestors.
Thank you all. I know we could stay on this question and go through each of these topics in way more detail. I see that it's 7:52 on my clock. I do have one last question for you all. What would you like the people listening in today to do to create change within their community about what we have discussed today?
I'll go first. So first, I would say acknowledge whose Indigenous land you're on. Do your best to find accurate sources of information about current representation of Indigenous people, and then educate others around you and encourage them to educate themselves as well. Discourage stereotypical ideologies. Take environmental action and do your best to conserve what resources we have and respect the environment, respect the Indigenous land that you're on, and speak up when you notice injustices.
Carm?
A lot of what Kiana said really covers everything. I feel like spreading awareness and being respectful of the land you're on, and taking care of it, I feel like that's really very important. And I don't know if there are many teachers on here. I know there is at least one because I gave one of my teachers the link. But really just kind of making sure that the students or your kids understand the history of Indigenous people and how significant that is. Yeah. Just do whatever you really feel is right. Whatever you feel like is respectful and responsible. I mean, that's all we can really ask.
Thank you, Carm. Jaden?
I would say educate yourself on your local Native tribe. Um, like Carm said, if there's any teachers, I would ask to reach out to a local tribe, maybe have somebody come in and teach a part of Native history in schools. I think supporting for everyone, I think supporting and understanding the history of Native people is all I ask for. Realizing that not everything of Native history is written in textbooks and many of it's hidden. So just understanding that you may have to redo what you've learned. So.
Awesome, thank you. I'm seeing that there are teachers on and that people are listening, which is wonderful. We are coming up on time. It's 7:56, so I'm going to start a closing. I apologize there wasn't much of a question answer portion, but I hope you took away so much from what these amazing panelists, what they had shared with you today. I want to thank you all, Kiana, Carm, Jaden, for sharing your stories with us, because it really needs to be heard. So I appreciate that so much. I will ask for a truth giving of sorts. If you're going to celebrate this holiday, I ask that you learn the true history of this holiday and bring it up around a dinner table and have those tough conversations, because they are so important for the future in general. So thank you so much for joining. Please reach out if you do have any questions. And thank you again. Thank you to the Holocaust and Human Rights Center for hosting this. And any closing remarks from you all, please share. We have 3 minutes.
I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you to the panelists. My name's Katie Moon. I am the Chipazawet coordinator at Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness. That stands for suicide prevention. And I just wanted to say that I'm so grateful to learn from you all tonight. I'm grateful to work with some of you, and thank you all for the work that you're doing. But I have to commend you, and especially to Carm, for being 15 years old and being a freshman in high school, to just stand up here how you are tonight. Like my inner 15-year-old self that was so afraid in those classrooms, and I never even had to go through the race card. You know, it's just, I want you to know that like you're talking for so many youth tonight, and keep going. I'm so incredibly proud of each of you too. I've learned from every single one of you. So I'm going to shut up so I don't take all 3 minutes. But thank you, Sage, for all your hard work as well.
Thank you, Katie. Awesome. Well, as we come up on our last minute, just thank you so much for everyone that attended. And again, thank you to our panelists and the Holocaust Human Rights Center. I hope you all have a great evening.